I'm not in a bad mood. Hey, it's Romania Black, and I'm gonna be honest with y'all. Today has been a day, and I was not really originally planning to watch episode 37 of Revolutionary Girl Utena, but I was like, I'm in a really good mood, like a really good mood, and I was like, now's the best time to watch this episode. Because I'm not sad, I'm not having a bad day. I was like, okay, all right, that may change after this episode. But I was in a really good mood. I was like, no, now's the time. Now is the time to watch this episode and to go from there and see, what we get. But we're on episode 37 of Revolutionary Girl Utena. And we have 3 episodes left and a movie. So there's that. There's that goodness. And I've got makeup on my glasses. So, but I have quite a few comments to read, and I have some things to say, but I have quite a few things to read and say, and I felt like today was the day to do it, so that's what we're gonna do. All right. I do know that after I watch this episode, I'm going to have to wait at least a solid week before I can watch episode 38 just because of scheduling, because I'm going to be away on trips outside of the channel. So that's probably a good thing. If this episode ends up being really heartbreaking and sad and makes me mad, then I'll have a week to cool off before I can watch episode 38, and there's nothing I can do about it. So, but maybe that won't be the case. Maybe that won't be the case. I did have a comment from episode 32 from Rosie Gaga that says, I really, really love Nanami's dual intro speech in episode 32. She says she wants to surpass Utena, her brother, and even herself. I'm so proud of her. But, like you mentioned, if she's realizing this now, why go through the notion of the duel? But everyone is kind of trapped in this rotation, or revolution, of duels, and I think this is the first duel where someone has had their own personal goal instead of trying to fight for someone else or for the ownership of Anthe. Yeah, that was a really good point, and so I'm glad you brought that up, Rosie Gaga. I honestly, to be fair, the absence of Nanami has been very noticeable, especially because Toga has been the center of the last couple of episodes, and I keep thinking, usually when we see Toga, we see Nanami, but because Nanami has essentially maybe freed herself from her brother, she doesn't have to be there following him and making sure he's, not flirting with Utena or whatever. But there is a part of me that while I'm happy for Nanami, and I'm glad she's away from Toga and away from Akio and this whole business, and if she had left the academy, I wouldn't have blamed her. I would have liked to have seen that, and I kind of want her to get her moment of being like, I don't need, but then again, she's not the main character. Utena's the one that needs to figure out she needs to fight for herself and not for anybody else. Come on, Scott Pilgrim. And so, we want Utena to have that moment, but I want Nanami to be able to express it, but also I want Toga to apologize. I know a lot of people were like, I feel sorry for Toga, and I do to an extent, but I'm also like, he also did some really messed up shit to Nanami. And that girl needs an apology. I don't care if he never sees her again or if she moves on from him or whatever. He owes her. She's his sister. He owes her an apology. And then they can do whatever. But that I want to see by the end of the season, if they don't show her getting an apology from him or some kind of reconciliation, wasted opportunity show. Wasted opportunity. But we'll see if we end up getting that or not. We'll see. Or just something adjacent to it. Some kind of resolution, right? Because we didn't really get a resolution in episode 32. Not really. Not like even like the Jury and Shiori was more of a resolution after the Ruka battle. So we still got 2 episodes in this one. So who knows? But then episode 33, you all have been very kind. And so, like I said last week, YouTube, I went through episode 33's comments on YouTube. You all are very kind, and so thank you. That means an awful lot. So I appreciate it. I do have a couple comments I want to talk to relating to episode 33 because, as you saw, was not in the best place to do observations in that episode. But Sophie Aquitaine, 4419, says, one thing this episode does to make the audience feel as trapped as Utena, and this comment, oh my God, this comment sent me, is that it never allows us to see the whole room, and more importantly, it never allows us to see the door. In fact, due to the layout of the room, we can assume that during the first few hotel scenes, Akio was standing between Utena and the door, placating her from her only means of escape from the room. And that comment struck such a deep place in my core that I cannot express in enough words how powerful that comment is and how important that comment is. And yes, going back through episode 33, which I don't think I will ever watch that episode again. If we have to recap it in something, then I just will have to be like, I can't do it. But I do think, thinking back on that episode and what I do remember from it, yeah, you never see the door. She doesn't get to escape, even though she wants to. So that sucks. But I'm glad that you pointed that out because it needs to be said. Helen M8445 had a really good comment about the food as interesting. And this comment too, again, powerful. Utena worrying about the sandwich ingredients going bad from the lack of refrigeration contrasts with Anthony's signature dish being shaved ice. It plays on the difference between something nutritious that goes bad quickly to something cold without any nutritional substance. Also, to me, making food signifies providing for oneself and being an adult. Exactly. I feel like making food is not exactly, I know there's the big sexist, misogynist joke of women, they're get back in the kitchen, but the reality is making food isn't really, it should not be gender normative. It's a life skill. So it's a sign of providing for yourself and also being an adult. And so when Wakaba makes lunch for Utena in episode 19, Utena tells Wakaba that she'll one day make a good wife. It's the job of parents to feed their children, but Utena's parents are dead, and we've not really had any references to Anthy's parents other than her telling Utena that Akio is like her father in episode 26. But neither of the girls really have adults make food for them, so they try to do their best themselves. Both fail at the job in different ways. The most frustrating thing about this is if they helped each other, with Utena handling the ingredients and Anthy handling refrigeration, they could manage the job just fine. But it's worthy looking at but while Anthy is looking at the fake stars, Utena is looking at the real ones. They aren't communicating, and they're going hungry because of it. Yeah, I really like that comment a lot. And that's been my frustration the last 3 episodes is that they're not talking. They're not talking properly, so they can't know each other's struggles and they can't help each other if they're not honest and communicating with each other. And it is, miscommunication is my least favorite trope in all of fiction. And I'm a communications major, so I know the importance of communication. And for me, I know that it's not hard, but then again, for me, it isn't hard. And so for others, I understand that it is, and the circumstances make it hard, but it's so frustrating when the answer is right in front of you, and you're like, if you just did X, Y, and Z, we would not have a problem. And they can't do it. So it's frustrating. Very frustrating. Also, I kind of think it's interesting that Utena is describing, like, the sandwich ingredients and, like, having all these components, and Anthy's is nothing. Which is so interesting with her character because we know practically nothing about her, right? Except what's on the surface. So I thought that was a really good comment. XXX Kimball XXX says, I hope you don't mind my comment, but I will tangentially about the canned coelacanth on a lighter note. So, fun fish fact. For a long time, coelacanth were thought to be extinct. Scientists thought they had died off millions of years ago until they were discovered alive in the 20th century. So I guess my marine interests informed my interpretation of this because I saw it as a surface level joke about how, in a way, the coelacanth species are being preserved or canned, and it was a miracle with the radio show. So that makes much more sense. I much prefer your interpretation, but at least the fish fact can cheer you up a bit, and I do hope you take care of yourself after watching. Thank you. I actually like your excuse better. Your answer and interpretation is a lot better, I think. I like that. I like the idea of them being preserved and canned is the miracle. That makes so much sense. And so I'm glad you said that because that makes things infinitely better. Yes. So thank you very much. Thank you. And then we get to the comments about Alex, about episode 34. As I'm recording this, episode 34 is on Patreon, episode 33 is on YouTube. So Alex Cornejo says, characters watching a play, fictionalized versions of themselves, in order to catch what their reactions would be, really gave the feeling of Hamlet's mousetrap scene. Squinting, I can see a parallel to King Claudius using Ophelia, who loves Hamlet, to entrap him. Kind of like Akio uses Anthy to trap Utena. So, just under various circumstances. And of course, Utena and Hamlet spend most of their story being ambivalent and not doing the thing that they need to do. I told Alex Cornejo that from my readings of Hamlet, though, I do think Hamlet was a little bit more nefarious than Utena. And I think Utena's a little bit more oblivious than Hamlet. But if you're telling me this is another spinoff of Hamlet, join the club. So I'm here for it. I need Mufasa to tell Utena to remember who she is. If we were going by Hamlet standards, I need the ghost of Mikage. I guess the ghost of Mikage was kind of trying to do that in fulfilling that. So, Also, I don't want to think of Akio as Utena's uncle. No, thank you. So, and Oliver Jajado kind of talks about the play thing as well, saying that I view the beginning of the play as a satire of how the patriarchy sees the natural roles of women and men. The tale of the impeccable prince saving all the princesses who are nothing more than damsels in distress and can't do anything by themselves, which is so antiquated and dated and outdated and just cliche that I was getting frustrated with it. I was like, surely that's not it. But again, this was in the 90s. I'm like, this show is so nuanced that I was like, surely the whole prince thing's not going to be this really cliche and old, outdated story about gender normative roles. But if Akio's the villain, I guess him telling a play about outdated, antiquated gender roles would kind of make sense. And the whole point of the story is to kind of say, wow, look how dumb that is. And we should probably subvert that. And I guess this is in the 90s. So, stories have come so far since the 90s, but you got to start somewhere. You got to have a foundation. So I guess maybe this is how they're shaking things up. And that's fine. It's very striking when you get to the end of the episode, you realize that the Shadow Girls version of The Tale of the Rose is obviously Akio propaganda, which, yes, going back to that episode, I did rewatch episode 34. I agree with that entirely. I rewatched it with a more sober mindset, and I agree. Retelling only his own perspective. Anthe being the malicious and jealous witch, stealing his light and status as a prince to hurt him on purpose. I think that's why we also have him gaslight her in the opening scene with the "why must you still torment me?" That makes more sense that he's just gaslighting her. We have to keep in mind that it's his own school. He'd never allow a play that doesn't fit his agenda. And that was the other thing too. I guess part of me thought that maybe the Shadow Girls weren't doing entire Akio propaganda because he was just in line to become the principal. But at this point, I think we all can agree, no, Akio's taken out every barrier that would have prevented him from becoming the principal. The thing that's so frustrating about all of this is he's capable of all of this manipulation and all of this evil and controlling all of these adults and situations around him, but he can't save Anthe. And that's when you kind of realize, no, the propaganda is he doesn't want to save Anthe. He doesn't care about Anthe because Anthe doesn't need him. And so he's gaslit her into thinking that she does, but he doesn't care about her and is trying to swap her out with Utena. That's the frustrating part. And it's like, but why? Why would you do that unless you're a giant asshole? And the answer is, he's a giant asshole. So it's like, there's no other reason to do that. That's the dumbest thing. But that's what he's doing. This week's commentary from Ikuhara is interesting. I save Oliver Jajado's comments for last, but there's other things I want to talk about after this. So we're just going to go ahead and look at the commentary. The Rose Crest. Has the prince become a mechanism to allow princesses to exist? Or is the existence of his princess the only thing holding up the sleeping prince's noble heart? So it's the idea that the prince needs this concept of a princess to have. This is the other part that's kind of like frustrating. And I don't know how much sarcasm Ikuhara is doing or the statement Ikuhara is trying to make. To me, I hope that this reads as sarcasm and snark and he's not trying to make a grand statement, because if the grand statement, because it says the Rose Bride is born, because I'm like, if his statement is that men have to have someone to protect to have a feeling of masculinity and belonging, that's toxic. So, I've prepared 3 points of view. One is the prince is a victim. Akio is what ruined the prince. Akio is what the ruined prince has come to in the end of the world, the prince's tragedy. But in that point of view, it's suggesting that because Anthe didn't let him save her, or because she hid him away from the world, he just, for some reason, became an asshole. I'm like, that makes no sense. I'm sorry. It doesn't. It's just like, oh, you became a terrible... In that case, I'm like, you were always a terrible person then. You didn't just become a terrible person because she did these things. You were always terrible. And you're just using her as a scapegoat. So that's thing number one. Then it says the Rose Bride is born. She saves the prince. In exchange for keeping him all to herself, she becomes the witch, and that is the tragedy. But it's like, no, that's dumb too. Because like, why is her protecting him making her evil? That again does not make sense. And so then he doesn't really come out and say the third point of view. He just ends the comment saying, ream after ream of faxes come into the Prince's mountain hideaway. I wonder if these sort of expressions feel a little dated. Which I'm hoping is the sarcasm of that the two views above are dated and not correct. Would it be text message after text message now? Or flame after flame on the internet? Oh, but I guess you can just block texts from people if you don't want them. No, a prince mustn't do something like that. It must be rough being a prince in any age. I hope that that's sarcasm. I'm assuming it is. I'm assuming it's sarcasm. And Ikuhara is making a statement like, because princes are pretty entitled. I'm assuming that that's sarcasm. I'm hoping it is. I'm assuming it is. We're gonna assume that it is. I'm curious to know other people's interpretation of that commentary because I'm assuming it's sarcasm and snark. But anyway, so then Zachiel for episode 34 says, I can praise Utena all day, but you can definitely tell it was written by a man with no experience with SA. I would agree with that. I imagine that Utena is repressing her memories as much as possible and either victim blaming herself or justifying what happened to her under the possible pretense that she has feelings for Akio. But even if that's true, as you mentioned, she would have probably been in a daze or behaving irregularly. When what happened to me happened when I was around Utena's age, and I'm very sorry that happened to you. And even though I repressed everything and victim blamed myself, I was in a daze for months and lashed out at people for seemingly no reason. I imagine Utena would realistically be acting more like that. And yeah, that was just the last several episodes. That was my main point, is that people that, even if you're repressing, even if you're victim blaming, even if you're acting like nothing's wrong, there still internally is that feeling that probably something has happened. Or here's my thing. If she hadn't acted the way that she did in episode 33, if he had just gotten with her and she was all blushy faced and like, oh my goodness, and it was still him taking advantage of her, but she just didn't realize it and know what was going on, then her actions in episode 35 and 36 would make more sense. But the moment you introduce that fear in episode 33, that uncertainty, that wanting to leave, wanting to escape, and you deliberately, like the one commenter said, make that POV where we can't see the exit and can't escape, but then the next 3 episodes you treat it like nothing happened, that doesn't line up. And to me, that just shows that the writers had never experienced that, and that's not their fault. No one should experience that, to be honest, and that's why they're writing this show, to illustrate the horrors that happened under these asshole men. But the point is, that's why now it's important to get inclusivity with your writers. You know, the whole inclusivity writer thing gets joked at, but that's why you have it, so that you have people with experience that can say, hey, here's a way to make it even more nuanced. Here's a thing to make it even more realistic and more relatable, so the people who have suffered through this can also relate. And they go on to say, I personally view it that Akio took advantage of Anthony's love for him, which I agree with, and used her as a scapegoat to avoid responsibility for his actions, like when he tells her to stop tormenting him despite assaulting her. The reason she smiles after he says that is unclear, but my personal interpretation is that she is feeling vindication from the idea that she's causing him pain, even if it comes with him blaming her for everything. You could also interpret it as her playing her role as the witch to follow along with the narrative of the play. The episode leaves a lot to interpretation. Those are just my theories. Yeah, one thing I've tried to avoid in the comments are people that try to tell me exactly what a scene means, because it's fiction. It's fiction, and fiction that's this abstract in places. I can offer up my opinion and what I think makes sense and what I think is the obvious interpretation. But at the end of the day, I'm just a reactor giving you my interpretation and my opinion. You don't have to agree with me, and you could have your own interpretation. And with fiction like this, I don't think there's a right answer unless Ikuhara comes out and says it. Now, if Ikuhara comes out and says what the interpretation is in black and white terms, then I would say, okay, yep, I accept that. That's what it is. But if they don't do that, then they leave it open to us to interpret however we want to, and nobody's right, nobody's wrong. It's just an interpretation. But with that being said, I do want to apologize because someone in with my frustrations in episode 34 and especially 35, and even last week, I do want to apologize if I made anyone's emotions or experience feel dismissed. I received a Discord comment that I had done that to them through my commentary and discussion. And honestly, I cried myself to sleep that night because I felt, one, I'd become as bad as Akio in doing something like that to someone. And two, I felt that I wasn't or shouldn't talk about my experience because it turns me into something that you all don't want to watch. And I know that people have said after that, they're like, oh no, you should be able to talk about your experience. But it just made me feel really bad and uncomfortable. And I want to apologize because I don't want anybody to feel dismissed. I was projecting a lot of anger in episode 35, especially onto Akio and Anthe that I didn't, onto Utena and Anthe, of course, Akio, but onto Utena and Anthe that I didn't mean. It was just my anger getting the best of me. So if you're still here, thanks. I'm going to do my best to turn that experience away from my perspective for the rest of the series, just because I have parts since 33 that, regardless of my experience, I'm unsettled with. But I don't want to wait until after the movie to cement all of that. So anything I say from now on, it's just a work in progress, because getting to go back and rewatch episode 34, for example, I definitely saw a lot of the things that I missed talking about because I was so caught up in my emotions. And finally, Bestial Moon 2327 started my reactions back in episode 1 a few days ago. And they said, one of my favorite things about Utena as a show is how abstract it is. It's a real Rorschach test of a series. What you put into it is what you get out of it. And God, is that true? There's certainly stuff that happens and a story, but hearing people's different ideas of what the themes and messaging is so much fun because everyone brings something different to the table, or in this case, to the whiteboard. So yeah, I mean, I'm just an English teacher who has a horrible essay experience that's giving you my thoughts about this series and its themes. And I'm not saying I'm right. I'm not saying I'm wrong. I'm just saying this is what I think. And that's pretty much it. So with that being said, I've wasted way too much time. I have talked for 22 minutes, and I appreciate it if you listen to all of that. So in any case, I have no clue what this episode is going to bring. I really don't. But I've got tea poured, and we're going to watch it. So thank you all so much. We're going to start episode 37 of Revolutionary Girl Utena. And we're going to do that here in 3, 2, 1, and let's do it to it. Okay, we're back. Oh, we're so back. Oh, thank God. Thank God. I'm going to be the first to tell you, I was so wrong. I was so wrong. I really thought this episode was going to piss me off. And I was like, I'm in a great mood. I'm going to watch it and we're just going to see where it goes. And it didn't hit me full on until the ED. Everything throughout the episode, I was spending most of the reaction going, wait, but why shouldn't we be doing this? And as the ED was rolling, it all just suddenly like came cascading like a wave, like the Japanese portrait of the wave, like crashing down. That's literally, it all fell into place. And I was like, oh my God, okay, we're going to talk about this. And I am so glad I was wrong about my thoughts of what this episode was going to be. I really was. It was one of those like expect the worst, but secretly hope for the best. And this was like, I was expecting the worst of the worst. And this surprisingly was like, no, we're actually going to turn the beat around and get back on track, which I was like, okay, good, fine. So you all that watched episodes 34, 35, and 36 were probably watching me going, bitch, you don't even know. So let's talk about this episode. The one who brings world revolution, because there's a lot going on. And I think I've been not giving Utena enough credit these last few episodes because of all of this. So Utena comes off of episode 36 with having basically earned the right, because she has earned it. She's won all the duels, earned the right to be the one to revolutionize the world. All right, correct? She's the one that has this strength. But what's interesting is the strength with the power of Dios. What's interesting is the power of Dios, if we still think of it as separated from Accio. Now, do I think that it's still kind of silly that this power is separated from Accio because Anthe basically deconstructed his idea of a princess from what we know, allegedly, without knowing the full scope of his version of the story, because we've only seen the version that he's given us. Yeah, it is kind of silly if Dios's power was separated because of Anthe's actions. That is kind of silly. I stand by that. But we haven't seen the full story yet, right? We haven't seen the full story. But Accio believes that Utena is going to be the one to give him this power back. So our theory has been that Accio is going to use Utena to become the new Rose Bride. And because she loves him, quote unquote, because she loves him and sees what he thinks is he wants to see him as her prince, that's going to get him that power of Dios back and allow him to basically control the world or whatever and have all of this and be even better, like Dios 2.0, essentially. Be the new 2.0 version of what he was before. Now, whether he would save all the princesses or not, who knows? It's interesting because one thing I will notice is we had all the themes of Lucifer and Aphrodite, but we've kind of gone away from that in this final couple of episodes, and I kind of miss that. I liked sort of the Greek and Roman mythology of it and kind of connecting, and the Gemini and all that. We had so much built up with that, and we've just kind of flitted that to the side now in place of this fairy tale and all of this. So I kind of miss it. I kind of would like to go back, but I guess it was all just trying to hint at he's a fallen angel. He's the prince that has fallen for stupid reasons of his own demise. Allegedly. We only know his side of the story. We don't know Anthe's side of the story yet, but we're going to talk about it because all the metaphors, all the symbolism started adding up in this episode, and I was like, okay. So we've got that. And so then the thing was that everything was going according to plan. Everything was going to go according to plan. And last week I got into Toga because he couldn't just tell Utena the truth, couldn't just spell it out in black and white. But as Toga, kind of demonstrated to us, and even how Nanami has demonstrated before this episode, Utena's a little dense, and she also is kind of stubborn, and they've tried to talk to her about it in the past, and she's just ignored them and brushed them off and been like, oh, you guys aren't making sense, whatever. So, reviewing episode 36, I can see why Toga decided in the end to be like, you know what, you're going to find out on your own. And when you find out on your own, you'll make your decisions. So, I do look back on that scene with a little bit more empathy on Toga's side of it, being like, yeah, she probably wouldn't have believed me, and we saw that in last episode. But what she ends up seeing is she sees that Accio, who is, formerly this, prince to her, she thinks could even be the prince that gave her the ring, that she sees him assaulting Anthe. And what I was afraid was going to happen, and what I was so frustrated about last episode, and you all were probably sitting there sitting on your hands going, bitch, you have no clue. And I am sorry I had to put you through that frustration, is you all were probably sitting there going, yeah, that's not how she's going to react. But I kept thinking, because everything that Utena was giving me last episode, in episode 35, was hinting at the fact that she was becoming more girly, and she was becoming this more heteronormatized version of a single white girl, well, not white girl, but single heterosexual girl that, and was going to be prissy and girly and just not be herself, not be the Utena that we've known her to be. And what I was afraid was going to happen was that upon her seeing Anthe with Accio, she was going to side with Accio over Anthe. And that was going to lead to her driving Anthe away, which was going to allow Accio to have what he wants. That's what I thought was going to happen, because it seemed to be going that way. And I've never been so glad to be proven wrong by a show. As soon as we did not get that, I was like, oh, okay. And I kept throughout the episode waiting for it to happen. I kept waiting for the argument to happen, and then it didn't. And then it took a twist, and then it started changing. And I was like, oh, we're not going to do that. We're going to do this instead. And I started getting excited again. And I was like, oh, thank God. So the one who brings the world revolution is what we're going to. So episode 37. So we start this episode off where Akio talks about, and I'm going to turn the sound off, being able to see in Utena's face that she didn't sleep well and asked if something was bothering her. I like that we have the knife spreading the butter. There's some things you could say about that. The thought that came to my mind immediately was that you're spreading things too thin. That once there's a saying that if you do too many things at once or you get too caught up in something, you get stretched thin. It's like scraping too little butter over too much bread. You can't quite cover it all, right? And I wondered if maybe it's a sign that Akio, he got too arrogant. He's gotten too cocky. He thinks that he's going to get his way and that this is all going to work out, because I think he's made a mistake. And the mistake is letting Utena catch him with Anthe. I think that's the big mistake. And so, but we're going to talk about it in this episode. And she's like, yeah, sorta. But it's not something I can really talk about with anyone. I was sad in this moment because it took me back to when Utena told Anthe that if Anthe ever has something that she needs to talk with someone about, that Utena would be there. And in the moment, I was frustrated because I was like, Anthe, this, this would have been your chance to talk with Utena about it. But what I think has happened is, and what I was hoping would happen, I think has happened. And again, these are all my theories. Next episode, I could be proven horribly wrong. So I am ready to be proven wrong again because I was proven wrong last week. So why not? But what I think happened is that from her seeing this, and we're going to talk about it in more detail, from her seeing this, she's realized that Anthe may have experienced, or she knows that she's experienced because she saw it with her own eyes, what she has. And there's this like undisclosed silence between them, but I don't know if Anthe knows that Utena has seen her with Akio. I thought she had. I thought they looked at each other in the last part of the episode. I thought they locked eyes and like we both know what's going on, but that may not have happened. Anthe may have just been looking off in the distance and didn't see Utena standing there. We don't know. But what I think Utena has realized is, shit, Anthe went through the same thing that I did with Akio, who was supposed to be engaged and who was supposed to be interested in just me, but clearly it's not the case because he's having these relations with Anthe. So when Utena says it's something I can't talk about with anybody, I wonder if she realizes, because she says in the next line there, she says everyone has secrets they have to keep, right? I feel like in that moment, that's Utena in her own way, kind of letting Anthe know, hey, I know what's going on and I get it. I couldn't tell anybody what happened to me because it was so horrific. And now I know you've not been able to talk to me about it because I couldn't talk to you about it. And there's that shared solidarity there without coming out and saying it. I feel like Utena has realized why Anthe hasn't said anything, because Utena hasn't said anything. And neither of them knew what the issue was until Utena sees it's happened to Anthe as well. And he's like, well, yes. I like that Akio doesn't know exactly what to do, and that's when he knows she's not wearing the ring. He's like, oh, well, you're not wearing the ring. You've never not wore the ring. And she's like, oh, well, if you've got the time, why don't we go on a date? If you've got the time after school today. And that's when Anthe like picks up, he's like, you and I can hang out together. And then Anthe says, I'm sorry. And then she lowers the bread to say, oh, this isn't mine, isn't yours, isn't it, Choo Choo? I feel like Anthe saying I'm sorry in that moment is also code for Anthe. Whenever Utena asks Akio out on the date, Anthe is not only interrupting the conversation because she doesn't want Utena to go out on a date with Akio, but her saying I'm sorry is also Anthe's one moment where she can interject and be like, I'm sorry I didn't tell you. I'm sorry that you didn't know. I can't tell you, but I'm sorry that you didn't know that. I feel like in that moment, it was Anthe trying to speak up and say, shit, don't go out with him. He's terrible, In 2 words, that's all she can say, right? But Utena's playing the game. Utena's playing the game. And it didn't hit me until later in this episode, but I'm like, until we got to the players, I was like, she's playing the game. But Anthe doesn't know that yet. And so then Choo Choo takes the bread back. And Akio says, you're asking me out on a date? And she's like, well, of course. And he's like, well, then I'll be out front at 5:30. And she's like, okay, well, wouldn't most girls kill to go on a date with someone like you, Akio? And he doesn't say anything. And Anthe just looks at him. I felt like that line there at first, I was mad about it, but then I thought about it. I was like, is Utena spreading that on intentionally? Is she saying that intentionally? Because she's not wearing the ring. So I thought something else at first. I thought that Utena taking off the ring was a sign that she was becoming, you know, the girly girl that Akio wants. The Rose Bride, the girly girl that would just do whatever he says, that isn't, you know, trying to be a prince and whatever. And I thought that at first, but that is not why she took the ring off. And we're going to talk about that in this episode. But before we can do that, before we can go any further, we've had sex on a motorcycle. We've had sex on top of a car. Now we're going back to the basics. We're going back to the old school bicycle with these two guys. I like that the roses on the table, there's a teal rose, there's an orange rose, or I guess it's a greenish rose, but they made it teal because Saionji. There's a red rose, a yellow rose, and a blue rose. They're the roses for the student council members, and they're all the colors of for Saionji, Toga, Juri, Nanami, and Mickey. And they've all gotten letters basically saying like, no more student council. I've got Utena. Akio believes, I'm sure that Akio believes that there's going to be one final duel. That the one time they're going to the castle, right? I don't know if does she have to duel Akio? I would like her to duel Akio. What I think is going to happen is Akio believes, I think she's going to challenge him to a duel, is what I think is going to happen. I think she's going to. I think that what Akio thinks is going to happen is that Utena is going to go to the castle, now that she's earned that place, and he thinks that she's going to be by Akio's side as his new Rose Bride, and it's going to allow him to get back the power of Dios. They're going to be complete, and I think he's expecting Anthy to just leave and not be there anymore, is what I think. Now, is Anthy going to go up to the castle with Utena, or is Utena going to go by herself? I don't know that yet. They don't really show us. They just show them looking towards the castle, but they don't show us them actually like going. So I don't know if Anthy's going to lead her there or if Anthy's going to stay behind. I don't know. I would like Anthy to go up there with them, but then I also don't want Anthy to go up there with them because I think Akio is going to be really, really mean. I don't know how that's going to work. I'm torn, but I think that Akio believes Utena is going to abandon Anthy, become his girlfriend, and become his new Rose Bride, and then they're going to revolutionize the world and gain back the power of Dios, and Akio can do whatever he wants. That's what I think Akio believes is going to happen, but I don't think that's what's going to happen. I think that Anthy has another plan in mind. But anyway, so they talk about the letters. We'll get to it. And I like Saionji and Toga kind of back to back. I like it. It's them leaning on one another. It's, you know, Toga is riding the bicycle like it was back then. Akio's not like hanging on to him for the front. He's leaning against the back. I kind of like that because one, it does show they're leaning on each other. So they are working together. I also like it because it's not Akio clinging to Toga. It's the opposite. Instead, he's got his back pressed to Toga. They're back to back, like they got each other's back, but he's not dependent on Toga and he's not relying on him. They're talking like equals, which I really love and I ship the dickens out of. So I'm really happy with that. I like the fact that there's a more kind of healthy relationship between them. And Toga's the one that's doing all the bicycling, which good for him. So then we see Utena. We see Utena with her jacket off, her shirt and her shorts, and she's taking a shower. And then it says she's gotten a quite different letter from them. Oh, I'm sure that Utena's letter is like, oh, join me and be my princess and do it and be my girlfriend. And then she's taken off the ring and laid it by the letter. I like her. Like, I feel like Utena taking the shower, I didn't know what to make of it at first, but I feel like Utena taking the shower is her washing away all that she's been doing. All of the, like, we'll talk about the playing the girl role, but I feel like her washing away, I think she's washing away all of what she's been through and been like, you know what, screw Akio. Yeah. After what he did to Anthy, screw him. And she's just washing away all of that and she's planning for her next role, which is going to be featured in part of this episode. So then they're like, but Saionji says the revolution doesn't interest her. And so because of that, the power of the Dios will remain sealed. So what they are suggesting is that in order to activate this power, you have to want to revolutionize. that, to me, suggests that maybe at one time, maybe Anthe found out that Akio was going to, I'm going to put be evil up here because that's easier to write. But I think at one time, Anthe may have found out that her brother was doing awful things and was not being nice to women or herself, because we've seen that happen. And I think from Anthe's point of view, maybe while Akio says that Anthe stole him away, maybe she was trying to keep him from hurting other people. And because she no longer wanted to revolutionize the world with him, that power of Dios got sealed away, right? That she sealed it away or something at the sacrifice of herself, and that's how she becomes the Rose Bride. And so Akio's trying to get that back. And he thinks if he can convince Utena to go along with him, he has to convince Utena to revolutionize, which in this case is kind of like fall into temptation. Then he'll be able to gain that power back. Because if you think about it, leading up to now, before Utena came along, you had these other duelists who all kind of wanted things for themselves. Like Juri talks about wanting the miracle for herself. Mickey wanted Anthe to help bring back the nostalgia for himself. Toga wanted Utena to help him gain power for himself. Saionji did the same thing with Anthe for himself. Nanami wanted the power at first to, make Toga be next to her and have her all to himself. And then time changed through that. Mikage wanted the power all to himself. So you have all these duelists that could have had the potential to revolutionize the world, but they weren't doing it for the right reasons. And then Utena came along and she was doing it for herself and for Himamiya, and that changed the game. So I think that's what Akio thinks is going to happen. And Saionji notes that if nobody wants to revolutionize the world, then it's not going to change anything. Will the revolution even happen? And to that, Toga stops the bicycle and says, well, I don't know. I don't know what the ultimate goal of Akio is. Well, we've talked about it, but Toga's like, I don't know what that ultimate goal is. And Saionji's like, do you think that Utena knows that Akio's the end of the world? Do you think that she knows? And he's like, well, I like that he kind of stops and says, he doesn't answer the question. Toga's like, it's been a long time since we've rode a bike together. He's like, I don't quite remember. Of course, my dog wants me to play with him right now. He's like, I don't know. He doesn't want to answer the question of whether she knows or not. But he's like, yeah. How long has it been? And then we have that damn phallic dick tower. We go right back to it. So yeah, I think Toga thinks that she knows, but doesn't want to confirm that, because if I think that from last episode, Toga cares enough about Utena that, oh my gosh, my dog. He wants me to grab this ball from his mouth, and it is like awful. But anyway, I think Toga doesn't want to think about whether Utena knows about Akio or not, because how she would discover that about Akio would be seeing him assaulting Anthe or assaulting her, which is the last thing that Toga wants to see or know about. So we have the car ride, and they go on this date. And meanwhile, while they are on this date, Anthe is by herself with the roses. I think what is very noticeable is there are a lot less roses. If you look here, the sun is setting, which shows like the end of a time frame. The sun is setting. We're coming to a close. We only have 2 episodes left after this. The penultimate climactic episode is next week. So we have that, but there are not hardly any roses left. They've all slowly started to leave, which is concerning. But also Anthe's not really watering them. She's just standing there. I think Anthe, because she tries to commit suicide later, I feel like Anthe believes that Akio's won. That Utena's going along with him, going on this date, being the girl that he wants her to be, and not be princely or not be... Basically, Akio equates... In Akio's mind, being a prince is having power over someone. He equates being a prince to having power over someone. If you have power over someone, if you're a prince, you rescue them, they owe you. They're damsels in distress, you protect them, they're yours. They're your property. That's the vision and the viewpoint that he has. Is it outdated? Fudge, yes. But that's the outdated viewpoint that he has. And that becomes very clear in this episode, if it wasn't clear already. And Anthe believes that Utena has fallen for that and is going to go along with it. I don't think so, though. I think Utena has figured out for herself that no, screw this. And we'll talk why in this, because when she looks like she's just all by herself in the greenhouse, like sad because she thinks that Utena's not going to be with her anymore. And they drive in this car. We don't see him try to put the moves on her until the very end. I do think she looks great in the red sweater. The red oversized sweater looks great on Utena. I hate to admit it. I hate that it's red like Akio. Bleh. But it does look good on her. Girl fashion. So then they stop the car in front of there, and she says, "Thank you for today." And then he says, "You're still not wearing the ring." And the thing about it is, the ring is control. That's what it is. The ring to Akio is a form of control. It's a contract. That is what it's been this entire series. It has been a binding contract to these duelists that wear it, that he controls them, that they are part of his world, and that he owns them, whether they like that or not. And because Utena's taken it off, it's given Akio pause and concern, being like, "Well, you're not wearing your ring anymore. I thought that was our promise ring. I thought that means we're together. It's a sign of your prince." And for Utena, it did represent the prince that she once knew, but that prince talked to her about nobility and strength and virtue. And the moment she saw Akio assaulting Anthe, that was no longer the prince that she fantasized about. Because she's like, the prince that I loved would not do any of those things. Because she equates that to the sight of Anthe being tortured. Now, the big question, of course, is, does Utena remember this? The big question is that, does she remember that it was Anthe being tortured? Did she finally put two and two together? We don't know that yet. And I don't know when she gets up to the castle with Akio if she's going to be like, "I figured it out and realized what was going on and remembered my promise to Himamiya." I don't know if she's going to remember that or not. I don't know if she's going to talk about it. But I believe that she, after viewing all of that, believes that Akio is no longer her prince. Or she believes that the ring is not worth chasing after. Or, even further, that the ideal of a prince is not good. And the very beginning of the whole series, was asking us, the audience, she wanted to be a prince, but is that a good idea? And honestly, I got a little mad at her at first in the reaction, because when he says, "You're still not wearing the ring," and she says, and she doesn't answer at first, and he grabs her hand, that's the ring hand, and holds it up. And then he says, "Why?" And the way he says it is why. He's not trying to be commanding or controlling, but you can see he's right on the edge of it. And she says, "I'm starting to think the ring really doesn't suit me." And he's like, "Oh, well," he says, "the outfit." He tries to be smooth, and he tries to like flirt with her and say something really debonair and smooth, being like, "Well, that outfit definitely suits you." He tries to be all sexy in that moment. We don't see her face. We don't see her reaction. She's not blushy, having all like the stars in her eyes anymore. No, ma'am, because she saw what he did to Anthe. And so she's like, "Oh, hell no." So we don't get to see that from her anymore, because that's not her reaction anymore. He's completely deflated that. And so he says, "If you like, I can give you a ring more suited to your new look." Suggesting like an engagement ring, right? Or a promise ring or something like that, right? Is what he's suggesting. And she falls back. And you think that he's going to like get on top of her and do something. And he has her cornered like he would. But if you notice her body language, she's guarding herself. She's not open. Like she's not, spread open for him to have access to. She's guarding herself. Like she doesn't want to see him near. Like she doesn't want him to pry and, do things he's not supposed to. And then she's not even looking at him. She's like, "Is Himamiya, do you think she's asleep yet?" Like she's telling him, she's like, "I don't want to have anything to do with you right now. Mm-hmm. And that's where it cuts off. And then she looks up like towards the tower. And that's when she says, you're not talking, and then he like gets off of her. So I guess they didn't do anything, but he says, you seem especially girl-like. And she says, well, I am a girl. And that's at first, when she said that, I was kind of mad because my whole thing, like I've said the whole series, is it's not Utena being feminine that would make me mad. It's Utena not being herself. And if Utena wants to be a prince or wants to be boyish or wants to be, trans male or whatever, that's her prerogative and that's her choice and that's what she should be able to do. But after it's sunk in by the end of this episode, her saying, well, I am a girl, that's not a bad thing. And the series, the way that Akio would have us believe, is conditioning women to think that being a woman is meaning that you're weak or that you're lesser. And that's not true. So Utena saying, yeah, I am a girl, is her proclaiming in that moment that, no, bitch, I am strong and I am noble and I can be virtuous. I don't have to be a prince to have those things. And he would like me to believe that I have to be a prince to have those things. And that's not true. And so that brings back that whole idea of, is being a prince a good idea? Utena's saying, no, I don't have to. She's like, I am a girl. I can be girl-like. It's fine. And there's that pause there. Again, she sits up, and that's when she looks up at the stars. And she's like, the stars are really out tonight. And she says, you didn't mention them tonight like you usually do. And then Akio's like, well, to tell the truth, he says, should I reveal the truth? And when she looks, he says, the stars don't interest me at all. It's all a big fat lie. And it's just a facade to try to seem, mysterious, or it's just a facade. It's all fake because that's him. He's all fake. I love it. So then we go back to them, and I like that Utena and Anthe are standing on either side of the bed. They're opposite one another, right? And it's a sign of, they're kind of at odds in this moment because there's a lot of unspoken tension between the two of them where they're like, oh, so you are awake. And Anthe's like, are you mad that I'm awake? Would you rather me be asleep? Because Anthe's probably thinking, are you mad I'm awake? Would you rather me be asleep so that you and Akio can go do things? And Utena's like, what would I be mad about? And then she's like, of course you would say that. And that's when Anthe looks back at her. She says, I wonder if he was teasing me a little bit. And that's when he says, tonight I seem to be especially girl-like. Was he teasing me? That's what Akio told me. And Utena says, girl-like. What does that mean? And so I feel like Utena in this moment is like, was Akio mocking me? And he was. And she's like, what does it mean to be a girl? Does it mean I have to be rescued? Does it mean I need to be protected? Does it mean I need a prince? And she's questioning all of this and asking the right questions. And there is a large part of me that wishes in these episodes there were much more communication between not only Anthe and Utena, but the student council and everybody. But I get it. I get that the show's not about that. They're not going to make this talk no jutsu. I get it. There's a part of me that's like, we could have shortened this by about 4 episodes if we just talked our way through it, but it's fine. Then we wouldn't have a show. So, but yeah, she's like, what does that mean? And I feel a lot of the questions that Utena asks, she kind of wants Anthe to answer, but I feel like Anthe doesn't believe that. I feel Anthe is so worn down at this point that Akio has tortured her so much and that she's been his accomplice because he's guilt-tripped her or gaslit her or made her forcefully be his accomplice. I feel like at this point, even if Anthe had an answer to what does it mean to be girl-like, I feel like Anthe believes she's not worthy to give that answer because she feels so awful about herself and she hates herself so much. So she can't really answer Utena in this moment. And then she says, girls are in the end, they're like the Rose Bride. That the way that Anthe describes them, Anthe would describe that all girls are like the Rose Bride. And in being like the Rose Bride, she says that all girls are defenseless. They have no free will. And they need a prince. And they need a prince to save them. Not just a prince, but they need a betrothed. They can't do anything on their own. Akio has convinced Anthe that she has no power. She is defenseless. She needs a prince. And she is just made to suffer. Like, he has completely warped her perspective to believe that women are just supposed to be subjugated or tortured. And which is bullshit. We all know it. But Anthe has been conditioned by this constant physical, mental, and psychological abuse by Akio to believe that. And that's why she says they're all like the Rose Bride. And you see her basically speared into the middle of this rose petal that's just burst into all these cracks and everything, right? She's like, in the end, women are just there to be at the whims of their princes, whether it's to be abused, whether it's to not have free will, whether it's to be defenseless, whether it's to be controlled. That's how she views what women are. And Utena's kind of like, I don't believe that. And I do love when she grabs her hand and holds it. This was the part where I thought the whole argument was going to come in the episode, and I kept bracing for it, and then it didn't happen, and I was like, okay, so what do we do now? And then everything turned around, right? And the two of them holding hands, where she's like, did you get a letter from the end of the world? And Utena, she says, if you go to the castle, you'll meet your prince. Now, Anthe is under the assumption that Utena wants to go meet her prince, that she wants to be with Akio. And Anthe's like, if you go to the castle, you're going to meet him. Is that what you want? And I don't think she realizes what Utena is planning, because we don't see Utena's eyes. And Utena almost looks like she's smiling there. I didn't know how to read that expression at first, if she was being sad. But if you look at it, she's kind of smiling like, oh, I know I'm going to go see him. I want her to go up to the castle and just kick Akio in the balls, just as hard as she can. Just kick him right in the gonads as hard as she can. And then just go, fuck you! And then walk out. And that's all of episode 38. She just goes to the castle, kicks him in the nads, watches him fall down, yells, fuck you! And then walks out. And then goes hand in hand skipping with Anthe. And then episode 39 is Saionji and Toga's wedding. I've solved the series. Can we have that? Can we have that abridged version? But I think that now, upon retrospect, looking at that, I think Utena knows exactly what she's doing. And she's like, so much has happened since we first met. She's like, I thought I needed a prince. I thought I wanted to meet him again. I thought I had to be a prince before I meet him. And now she's like, I don't want to be a prince. Like, if that's what it involves. I feel like Utena comes to the same realization that Nanami does in some ways, where she's like, if this is what it means to do this, I don't want to do this. This is not what I want anymore. And so I love, she's like, so much has happened. And I love, and in that moment, what gave me closure that Utena has figured some things out is that when she grabs Anthe's hand and holds it, it's like, okay, she's closing the gap there. And then they both stand there and hold each other's hands for a long time. And they're like, is this really goodbye? Because if she goes up to the castle and sees her prince, that's who she wants to be with. And Utena believes that, or Anthe believes this might be the last time she sees Utena. We'll see. And so then we have Saionji and Toga saying, you actually sent us letters, keeping up the act till the very end, huh? And then they're like, I like that Toga's like, what are you planning to do with Utena? I like both of them are on top of the car hood. Like, Toga has moved on from Akio because Akio kind of disgusts him now, and he's kind of moved on. And now him and Saionji are having, fondling foreplay on top of the sex car, which needs to go crash in a ditch. He's like, what are your plans for her? I like that this is basically just them having sex on top of a car, and this is the only way we can show it for the kids. He's like, what do you mean my plans? Like Akio's like, me? Plans? Little old me? Bullshit. I hate that we don't know them, though. And then Toga's like, well, I don't think that Utena will pass through the Rose Gate. I don't think she'll go. And Saionji's like, she has no reason to. Uh-huh. It's like, And then Akio says, doesn't she? She never wanted to be the one who brings the world revolution. But now you've worked your way into her heart. So they're talking about, like, she's never wanted to do this, but you've wormed your way in. So do you think she'll actually go through with it? She's chosen you, a real man, over her fantasy prince. So Toga's basically saying, like, do you think she'll go up into the castle where her fantasy prince is now that you've convinced her that she should like you instead, and you haven't come out and said that you're her prince? So Toga's like, are you going to tell her the truth, or are you just going to try to see if she goes to the castle or not? I also like that Toga brings out the miniature Fuji camera, like just the bloop, like it's just there. And then, of course, when they snap the picture, you see Akio in his prince gear. Where he's like, well, she has to make the choice. And the choice is not yet made. So Akio's like, I think Akio in that moment thinks that she will do it, but I feel like Toga and Saionji just went there to goad at him, to try to, like, throw him off before the end. They're like, oh, so you think you've really won? But, like, why? And Akio's like, well, why wouldn't I have won? You know, I feel like he got a little on edge here. Point number two of why I think that Utena is turning around and is going to go up there and give Akio a piece of her mind is because she actually plays basketball with the dudes. Whenever Utena was, like, starting to put the earrings on and start to, like, change for Akio, she was starting to abandon some of her, like, more tomboyish tendencies to be the girly girl that Akio wants to date that's all little defenseless Utena. Here, she's playing basketball again with our feminist icons, the boys team of Otari Academy. I love the basketball team. They're our feminist allies. We need them. And then she says, that's when Anthy says, it seems my brother loves you as well, Mistress Utena. Now, when Anthy says loves you as well, Utena looks really concerned about that, because when Utena has the letter in her lap, she looks back at Anthy, and Anthy's like, so my brother loves you, and that's why he wants to be with you. But Utena knows what Akio did to Anthy, and she's like, do I really want to be with someone who would do that, you know? So then we see Utena, like, playing with the basketball bros, and she's deep in thought, still kicking their ass at basketball while still deep in thought, mind you. And then Anthy says, Mistress Utena, I wish we could stay like this forever. But Anthy is all but convinced that Utena is going to leave her, and they're not going to be able to do this anymore. Which, theoretically, regardless of what happens, whether she stays in the castle, whether she leaves, whatever, she's going to revolutionize the world, or potentially doesn't. Things aren't going to be the way that they were, which is sad, because it's the end of the series. They're not going to be the way that they were, right? So then, I like that Utena's like, okay, and she dunks the ball. The moment she dunked the ball and ripped the letter at the same time, I was like, okay, girl's back. We got Utena, because she's not going along with the letter. She's not going along with Akio, and she can still dunk a ball. Akio would not believe that a real girl could dunk a ball like Utena. And I love Utena's, like, ripping up the letter, being like, I don't care about Akio, and I don't care about the end of the world. I don't care about anything but you, Anthy. And Anthy's just like, you know, what's so frustrating out of all of this is we don't know what Anthy's thinking. If Anthy, we as the audience believe that Anthy is fully convinced that Utena is going to go along with Akio and leave her, which is so sad. Because by this point, I'm like, no, I don't think Utena is going to leave you, Anthy. I think that she's come to the realization that she doesn't need a prince's promise to help a friend. And Anthy's a friend. And then she dunks the ball, which, girl still got game, right? So then as she's doing that, our student council came along. And during the reaction, I was like, okay, one thing that I have really kind of missed throughout this last act, ever since the sex drive arc, ever since episode 31, really. Ever since episode 31, which has been a lot of episodes, we just haven't seen a lot of the student council, and we haven't seen Mickey or Yuri do a lot. I wish they'd done more. I don't know what they would have done, but I wish they would have done or been more active in this part of the story. And that is kind of one critique I would have, is that I wish that they'd been more active in, like, trying to do something, or at least we'd gotten more scenes of them talking amongst each other, or I don't know. It just felt like they were so absent. And I get why they had to be. I just wish there had been some way to incorporate them more into the story. I wish. But they both show up. And at first I was like, are you guys going to talk to Utena about your concerns that you had last week? No. And they kind of do. But it's the weirdest scene. And I kind of am in love with it. It's a badminton scene. Why badminton? Who knows? I did want to get on here of why badminton? What is badminton? Does it have any symbolism? Okay, badminton can symbolize leadership, trust, and cultural exchange. Says badminton can be a symbol of leadership because it's voluntary. It's a voluntary activity that's rooted in commitment. Badminton can teach you trust and to let go because you need a reliable partner to hit the shuttlecock when it goes to the back of the court. It is a cultural exchange because its popularity has helped different cultures understand and exchange ideas. It's a full body workout, blah, blah, blah. Has a long history in Asia, especially in China, where it's considered a traditional sport. Its roots also can be traced back to the ancient game of battledore and shuttlecock, which was played in China, Greece, and India. Well, hell, Greece and India, we have characters that kind of have similar appearances, and then we've had all the mythology, so that seems to make perfect sense, right? But I like this idea that you have to have a reliable partner, so it teaches trust. I really like that because that seems to be the representation. I was like, why badminton of all things? But if it's talking about trust and you have Mickey and Juri and then Nanami come here to be with Utena, it seems like a representation of, okay, we trust you. We're going to talk to you now. And during the reaction, I felt so stupid now, but during the reaction, I was like, talk to her, tell her the things, tell her about Akio, tell her about your experiences. The conflict resolution communications major in me was like, have a powwow. And this series is like, we will have none of that because that's not us. We're not going to do that. So instead we do this Neon Genesis-esque badminton game that is really just them kind of like having their last little talk before Utena goes to face the final boss. It's really this, and at first it was nothing like I ever would have expected, and at first I was mad about it, but then as the conversation went on, I was like, no, I actually kind of like this. I actually kind of like that this is their last conversation, and this is how we do it. And why didn't we have more moments like this throughout the series? I wanted that. Because like Utena jokes about them challenging to a duel, and Mickey's like, well, that we've all received letters that you've won, so you've been chosen, so we are not going to duel anymore. And they just batter it back and forth. And she's like, so? And then as it goes back and forth, they're like, we're wondering what you're planning on doing. I feel like Mickey and Juri were wanting to ask Utena, like, to try to figure out, like, are you just going to go along with Akio? Are you going to let him take over the world? Are you going to try to do something? Like, what's your plan? Before we all die, we'd like to, like minds would like to know. And she says, well, the power to revolutionize the world. She's like, it's sort of amazing, but in the end, all I've been doing is playing Prince. I like that Utena in that moment, she talks about the idea that she's been acting. She's like, all I was doing was acting like a prince. So she's like, do I deserve the power to revolutionize the world when I've not even been my true self? I've just been acting like this ideal that was presented in front of me as what I should be. She's like, dude. And then Juri's like, well, in the end, none of us were able to beat you because of that. So is that a bad thing? And I like that Mickey's the one. I like Mickey goes off to get the shuttlecock and that leaves Juri and Utena alone. And she's like, when you think about it, even though I'm a member of the student council, all I did was think about myself. Because if you think about it, if you've ever been on a student council, I've been on a student council before. The point of the council is you do things on behalf of each other and of the group, not for yourself. And Juri's kind of like, we're all kind of hypocrites. None of us were doing what we were supposed to be doing by our title. And Utena just kind of like smiles at that. Like, it's fine. And this may be a little pathetic, but even now, all I can do is think of myself. And Utena's like, well, are you talking about Shiori? I like that while Mickey's going to get the shuttlecock, the two ladies that are, jury is, they're asking their questions. Utena's like, let's be honest. Do you like Shiori? And jury's like, well, she's like, why is it? And then it goes back. And she goes, why can't I set my feelings free? And I'm assuming that means that jury's like, why can't I just tell Shiori and just be myself and love her? And she's like, what are you going to do with Anthe? Which is, she's like, why can't I just say how I feel about Shiori and be free with my feelings and be able to love her freely? What are you going to do about Anthe? Are you in the same boat? And as it goes back and Mickey goes back and forth with it, she's like, do you love her? And Utena says it's different from the love that you feel. And I do think that's true to an extent. I feel like what Utena is suggesting with Anthe is it's not just a friendship, but it's kind of like them being soulmates. It's kind of like them being the yin to each other's yang. She's like, what I feel for Anthe is beyond just a crush. It's more than that. It's not just a crush on someone. It's not just something that's romantic or sexual. It's not lust, but it's not maybe just a friendship. And I've been waiting this whole damn series for Utena to talk about how she feels about Anthe. I have been waiting 37 episodes for her to have a genuine, honest, intimate conversation. And she chooses to have it with Jury, which is perfect because Jury's the one that questioned from the beginning how Utena felt like Anthe. And now Utena is giving back those feelings and telling Jury how she feels. She's like, it's different from the love that you feel. And she's like, I genuinely, not to say your feelings aren't genuine, but, and then she kind of looks away. She says, but now I feel like she can't answer the question because she herself realizes what she's put Anthe through. She's like, I genuinely love her, but she's like, I don't, now I've done all these things and I've, let Anthe have this stuff happen to her. She's like, do I have the right to tell Anthe that? Do I have the right to say I love her? Is that even something that I can say and that I'm okay with saying? I love that she's questioning that. And I wish she would have just came out and said more, but they're saving it, I'm sure, for episodes 38 and 39. And I like when we cut back, Utena looks troubled. She's like, what can I say to her now? And Jury kind of has this knowing smile like, yeah, we know. And she's like, Himamiya and I. And then she's like, Himamiya and I. And she doesn't look at the camera. She looks away from us. And that's when Nanami shows up. We have the triangle here. And Nanami, I've never been so happy to see Nanami. I was like, if we end this series and I don't see Nanami, and she's not wearing the student council uniform anymore because she's not part of that business. She's like, no. And I love that she grabs the shuttlecock and she's like, are you really that stupid? And she's like, haven't you figured out you're being tricked? I was like, thank you, Nanami! You bitch! You beautiful bitch! Thank you! I was like, yes! I was like, I'm glad. Whenever you need somebody to say it, somebody's gonna say it. When is Nanami's birthday? When is her birthday? Is she a fellow Taurus? Nanami Kiryu birthday. I feel like that's fine looking up. Is that okay? Can we find out her birthday? I don't want to look at anything else from her. I just want to know her birthday. I feel like that's not a lot to ask. Maybe she's not a Tauros. Is she not a Tauros? Just find something. Her birthday is August 8th. Oh, she's a Leo. Oh, well, hell, of course she's a Leo. That makes sense too. No, she's like Kagami from Kuroko's Basketball, who's just like, I love that Nanami breaks through and does the actual communication. Her and Kagami would get along great. Where she's like, haven't you figured out you're being tricked? And she's like, and that's when Jury and Mickey are like, oh, now, Nanami, don't interrupt. We're over here being like abstract in our conversation, and you have to come out and be all literal. And they're like, oh, did you resign from the student council? And she's like, oh, of course. She's like, I'm not doing that shit anymore. I love her. She's like, it's ridiculous. I'm so glad for Nanami. I'm glad she's being her own person. And then she comes out and says it. She's like, hey, stay away from the chairman and Anthe Himamiya for your own good. And she throws it back. Now, I feel like she has to say Anthe in there because she doesn't want Utena to get hurt. And knowing that Utena likes Anthe, but knowing that Akio is in the mix and that he's causing all this problem, Nanami's like, you might as well just stay away from both of them because you're going to get hurt. And instead, Utena just bobbles the thing. She's like, oh, thanks for the advice. She's like, I've already figured out everything and I've got my own plan in the makings, but thank you. And then Nanami's like, are you dense? Did you hear me? I'm being serious. You're always meddlesome and you're so dense. And Utena in that moment is like, I like that she says, aren't you being meddlesome by giving me advice? At that point, whenever she said that, I was like, Utena's in control and she knows what she's doing, which this is I'm feeling very trepidatious about this because Utena's usually not this on top of things. She's been our oblivious himbo for so long, but when you see a traumatic incident like what we've witnessed at the end of last episode, it puts some things in perspective. So I'm glad that the dots are all finally connecting for Utena. It's about damn time. But yeah. And then she asked Nanami, if it's right for her to give her advice. And Nanami's like, well, fine. Whatever. Which is, she's like, talking to you makes me do crazy things. And I'm sure in Utena's head, she's thinking, like brother, like sister. Right? She's like, well, blood type B people like me tend to be stubborn in conversations. But so is Nanami. She's like, I am too. I love that. I love that solidarity. I love Nanami being like, well, I'm like you as well. We are stubborn. We're both stubborn. I love that. I love that conversation so much between them. I'm like, and then she throws the shuttlecock up and it kind of just goes in the sun and disappears like Team Rocket from Pokemon. And I like Nanami and Utena are both like, we've been frenemies this entire series. We've been against each other, but the real thing is we should have had solidarity with one another the entire time. We should have been friends. Why couldn't we have been friends? And I feel like they should have been able to be friends. Bullshit. And then Mickey and Juri are like, well, there goes the shuttlecock. Guess we're done playing badminton. And then, Utena starts hitting it back again. And I like that Nanami stands beside her. And so then Mickey says, hey, Miss Tenju. And he says, and I like that Kozu's watching them from afar. Like, I wish she would have gotten in on this too. He says, I've been thinking about you a lot lately, Miss Tenjo. And I like that Mickey's thinking about Utena, and Utena's like, well, what is this? I thought you loved, are you confessing to me? And she's like, I thought that you loved Anthe. And Anthe seems to be looking from the greenhouse, but I don't know if she can see them from the greenhouse or what she's making of it, or if she's just looking at the roses. And Mickey's like, oh, well, can't I change my mind? That in itself is showing that Mickey's moved on. Like we've seen with Toga and Saionji, Toga's whole thing was acquiring. If we go back on here, Toga's whole thing was acquiring power. But by letting Utena, by trying to tell Utena about the chairman and about trying to kind of sabotage the chairman's whole deal, Toga kind of said he didn't want that power anymore. And instead, he's hanging out with Saionji, his bestie, who he said he didn't even care about. And I'm like, for somebody that didn't really care about this guy and said he wasn't your friend, you sure are hanging out with him and having sex with him a lot. And Saionji, who thought that he needed a woman and needed that to be like a prince, he said, screw that. We're just going to have sex on a bicycle and abandon that whole thing. And then you have Mickey, who was stuck in this nostalgia, believing that he needed Anthe to solve his problems and be able to go back to the past. Him just saying, can't I change my mind and think about you instead, is a sign that he's letting go of that he's moving on, that he's letting go and being able to move forward, which is something he couldn't do, and why Kozu looks kind of like happy down at him below. And then Nanami, her being in the school uniform is a sign that she's moved on. She's not trying to be in the student council. She's not chasing after her brother. She's made amends with Utena. She's moving on. And then we hit it over to Juri and she's like, oh yeah, I'll think about it, which we know that's not going to happen. And then we see Juri saying, well, I was wondering if you could give me a picture of yourself. That line there did make me kind of feel a little bit worried, because the idea of Utena giving a picture to Juri kind of gives me like, I'm never going to see you again vibes, which we only have 2 episodes left, so that's a real distinct possibility. But her saying, I want you to have a picture of you instead. And then we see Shiori looking at Juri from afar. Like, she's like, oh, well, maybe I like you. And Juri says, I want to put it in my new locket. I love that because I don't think that Juri has a crush on Utena, but I think that what Utena represents is what Juri wants to remember, to maybe remind herself of who she needs to be. And that's so good. Again, it's her moving on. She's not going to chase after a lustful relationship. Instead, she's going to let Shiori come to her. And so by that point, by the end of this scene, this seemingly odd badminton scene suddenly became a way for these four characters to all have closure. And it's so wild. And I'm fine with it. It was not on my bingo card, but I'm surprisingly here for it. And then they say a dangerous rival appeared. I like that Mickey jokes being like, oh, Juri, are you going to try to get in on this love triangle between Utena and Himamiya? And then Juri's like, Juri, does she respond to that? She doesn't! And then they're like, you people are idiots. Yeah, she doesn't respond to that. I don't think Juri's going to be a rival to Utena and Anthy, but I think that Nanami's right. They are idiots. And then there's Utena standing there with her racket after having the interaction with all of them. I love it. And then we get the players. Then we get the girls crashing into the tower. So this final thing for the Kashir Shadow players, I wonder, do you know what I wonder? So across over this, we have several things. We have a light bulb. And the moment I saw the light bulb, that cemented it to me. That was like, oh, Utena's figured it out. She's figured out Akio's the worst. She's figured out what he's done to Anthy. She's decided, you know what? Screw all of this. I'm going to go to the castle and just wreck shit. That's what I think is going to happen. I think she's going to go along long enough for Akio to think he's won, and then she's going to pull the rug out from under Akio, and he won't see it coming. That's what I think is going to happen. Because I think that light bulb is the sign that she's figured it out. Also, what you have here is the horse. I didn't know what that was at first, but it's like a wooden handle coming up, and on top of the handle is the horse head up here. And sticking by the horse is a sword, like a prince's sword, with a red ribbon hanging off of it, you know. And then you have the light bulb, and then hanging over top of the horse, I'm not going to draw it, but it's a puppet of a dragon. So what the fascinating thing about this is it's all a construct. It's all fake. The wooden horse, the white horse that Akio rode in on, it's fake. It's wooden. You could look at it two ways. You could look at it as the wooden horse is a representation of how Akio's white knight on a white horse thing is all fake. You could also look at it as this wooden horse is like a Trojan horse, and Utena herself is going to offer herself to Akio like a Trojan horse, and then when she gets in the castle, she's going to be like, let's burn it down. And that could be when Anthy and Utena come in on horses and destroy the castle. Maybe that's the tide of the OP. I don't know. We'll see maybe next week or in episode 39. I don't know. But the dragon over it is a representation of it's a puppet. So it's not real. It's a puppet. The dragon is a puppet. But it also is a representation of how Akio, who was this prince, he fabricated the enemy. He fabricated the dragon that he had to slay. It's a representation of how all of these princesses have had princes to come save them, but what they're being saved from is a fabrication made by the prince themselves to convince these women that they need protection in the first place. And that's the Shadow Girls are revealing this in the final. I don't know if we're going to get the Shadow Girls after this. This really felt like the end of the Shadow Girls. And I was like, oh, but it's my favorite Shadow Girls one because they go, it's time that we broke up. It's time that we broke up. I've made up my mind. There's only one future for me. I'm going to be an actress. And to me, what that was that I was like, I feel like Utena and Anthy, it's going to be like both of them are breaking up. They're both going separate ways. But Utena's like, I'm going to act. I was acting like the prince. Now I'm going to act like a princess or a rose bride until I can convince Akio to let me into that castle, and then I'm going to wreck shit. I'm going to be an actress. And we're like, 3, 2, 1. And then they go to kiss, but then the one, and like that, you land a role in a movie, and you get thrust into the limelight, and get caught in a flashy scandal, and end up with magazines talking about you. And so here's the thing. I think that it's like this whole thing. We have the cameras that we've seen taking pictures of Akio and Saionji and Toga, all the photos with the scandal and the flashy lights. I think that it's, you know, the problem of acting is you can get caught up in all of it. You get caught up in the act. And they're like, what do you do? And they're like, oh, that won't do. I won't do that. Well, maybe just a little. To me, that's like, Utena's like, oh, I'm not going to get caught up in too much of a scandal, except, you know, maybe running off with Anthe. That might be the little scandal that we have. You know, we'll see. We'll see. But yeah, and they're like, a little. In other words, you just want a taste of what that life is like. And she's like, exactly. And so for a second, that made me think of that Utena went along with part of Akio's game of being the girlfriend and being the girly girl. And she just wanted to try it on and see if that's what she wanted to be like. And then she's realized, no, that's not what I want. Just like, oh, I tried on the princeliness, but now that I know what that involves, that's not what I want. So it's like you did a little bit of the acting until you figured out if that's really what you wanted to do. And then they do the little kiss scene. And they're like, I saw the application on your desk. Are you going to go for the audition? Which to me is the letter of the end of the world saying, are you going to go up to the castle to be with Akio? That's the audition. And she says, well, but a girl from a high school drama club trying out for a movie, they'll just laugh at me. And it's kind of like, Utena's like, am I really going to do this and pull it off? And then the other girl's like, well, I won't laugh at you. And she's like, really? And they're like, so we really are true friends. And to me, that represents Utena and Anthe being like, I'm going to go through with this. Do you think I'm stupid? And Anthe would be like, no, do it. And then they stay together. And then they go to kiss, but the dang other girl gets in the way and puts the hat on and says, it's time to go. And like, well, Mr. Judge, and they're holding a megaphone, which is weird. And like, Mr. Judge, he's judging the audition tomorrow. And they're like, let's go out to eat, Mr. Judge. And he says, sure. Anything you want, Daddy will get for you. And they're like, Daddy? So to me, Mr. Judge is Akio. I feel like Akio is Mr. Judge, the one that gets to determine whether or not Utena gets to be the Rose Bride or not. And maybe when these two Shadow Girls said they were going to be together throughout it and true friends, it's a sign that Anthe's going to follow Utena up to the audition in the castle. We'll see. And like, did you know, by the way, did you know only one girl can be chosen at the audition? Which means only one girl can be the Rose Bride. Right? I wonder, do you know that I wonder? Oh, I love it! That was so good! That was the best one. I was like, oh, I can't wait to see how it'll go. I cannot wait to see how it will go. You know what I don't want to see ever again in my life, though? This messed up scene that we got at the 16-minute, 32-second mark. That is the least subtle of... If episode 33 was the most subtle thing I've ever seen, this was the least. Because we've known the car as a representation of sex this entire time. Everybody that gets in the car with Akio might as well be having sex with them if they're in the seat beside him, right? In this scene here, how can we portray what it is? Basically, every time we have stumbled across Anthe and Akio in the Star Lab, every time we've seen them, what we've seen is the aftermath. Every time we've stumbled across them, we have seen Anthe strewn out on the couch, and it's always after the event has happened, and it's the aftermath. And that's been horrible enough. But this show was like, what if we showed you a metaphorical representation of her assault as it's happening? And while Utena's was incredibly quiet and distant and subtle and creepy in that sense, this one is a gaping wound with salt poured into it. It is this car roaring down the highway, which as soon as you could hear the car roaring, I was like, I don't like where this is headed, because it's in all of the other car scenes, the car has accelerated slowly, and then Akio revs up the engine at the end. Here, it was already revved as far as it could go. And what's interesting is when you look at the beginning of this scene, and I don't know if they just reused footage. They might have just reused footage. But there was Akio in the prince costume, and it almost looked like Saionji next to him, because it looked like green hair. So I don't know if they just reused the footage at first. They might have. Because then it cuts over. Or honestly, if they reused the footage, or was, I don't know. But then we see Anthe with the dress next to Akio as the Rose Bride. And we see what he really does to the Rose Bride. And she's literally sitting there screaming in pain at what he's doing to her. And he's got both hands on the wheel, aggressive. Like his shirt open, aggressively driving as fast as he can, showing like a metaphor of what that sexual encounter is like, and basically showing how abusive he is to the Rose Bride as she's like literally screaming. And then he says, "Does it hurt, Anthe?" Well, obviously it does, right? We all know that it does. And then as he's like, "I'm not the one causing it." And I'm like, that is the gaslighting bullshit that cemented like episode 34 now that we've seen this, I'm like, oh, everything we'd learned from episode 34 was gaslighting bullshit. You're a terrible person, and you're terrible to Anthe, and you've been gaslighting her into thinking that this isn't your fault when it 100% is. And when he said, "I'm not the one causing it," he's like, it's the world causing it. And we see him drive past her. And him driving past her, he has his shirt off completely now. He's naked, presumably. And she has, like, she's leaning back and all the spikes are coming out of her. Like, now, could you say that it is a representation of society and what they believe of women, and that this suffering and prejudice, to me, you know what it is? You know what it is, this representation? Because it's clearly him. He's basically saying, yeah, I'm the one assaulting you right now, but it's not my fault I'm assaulting you. This is just how the world views you and your value, and I'm just going along with it. You know what it reminds me of? Again, when I was reading and watching another series, Berserk, during the times there were SA, and I would get very frustrated with it, and I would say, why does it have to be? Because I will say this for Utena. This is by far the most disturbing images of SA that I've seen, the way that it was accomplished and handled, and in the most effective way. But it is the least gratuitous, the least fetishizing, the least sexualizing. It is polar opposite of Miura. Polar opposite. This is the way that it accomplishes the SA is just as powerful, just as destructive, just as horrifying, but it does not fetishize it. It does not sexually exploit the female characters in it. It handles it very appropriately for what it does. Berserk, I would argue, is to me fetishy and gratuitous and sexualizes the female characters that are involved. And I would explain my frustration about that at length, ad nauseum. And one of the comments that I would get, one of two comment threads that I would get that would make me want to go and crawl into a ditch and light myself on fire, was one of them would say, well, this is a medieval fantasy, and in medieval times, that's just how it was. Like, would literally say that. And I was like, And then the other one was that, yeah, it happens. And that is that Akio comment. That is that comment. That is that it's not me that's doing it. It's not my fault I'm doing it. It's the world. And that's just how things are. That argument of that's just how things are being an excuse to commit those crimes is what I'm talking about. And it drove me crazy. And to see this series actually give Akio doing that and making that the excuse it's so validating of my frustration and anger of those comments. And I'm like, yeah, that's it. And it is horrifying. And this whole scene is horrifying. And then it shows him next to her, and they go through that scene again, only he's in the suit this time, and then he accelerates, and she's clearly in pain. Yep, it's bad, and I want to throw a flaming torch at him. Can we have that? So then, we don't show the aftermath, right? So instead, we cut straight from that scene, which we presume happened while Utena was not around, and Akio's just, like, super mad about it. And so they're like, what do you plan to do in the future, Himamiya? And she's like, the future? That's such a crazy thing that Anthe had not even considered the future. She had not considered what that life would be like. Which, again, is like red flag, red flag, red flag. She's not thinking about the future. And she's like, well, once you've graduated from here, we think graduating means a lot different than Utena in this instant. When I think of graduated, I think of Mikage and Anthe, like, floating into the nether sphere if she's a ghost. Which I don't know if they all are ghosts or what the case is. We won't know for another 2 episodes, probably. But Utena is like, well, once you leave high school, what's your goals? Isn't there something you want to do? And she says, well, as long as I can raise roses, I'll be happy. So then we have the tea, right? And she's like, well, that must be nice to have something that you want to do. So then Utena starts to eat the cookies. And she's like, are you familiar with Cantarella? I wanted to look up Cantarella. Cantarella. Yeah. And so Cantarella, get here, was a poison allegedly used by the bourgeois during the papacy of Pope Alexander VI. It may have been arsenic that came in the shape of a white powder with a pleasant taste, and it was sprinkled on food or in wine. If it did exist, it left no trace in the works of contemporary writers. So, the exact origin of the term Cantarella is unknown. It could be derived from Cantharos, which is ancient Greece, a type of ancient Greek cup used for drinking, or the Neo-Latin word catharellus, small cup, in reference to the cups in which the poison would be served. The word may be related to cantharsis, referring to the Spanish fly or other blister beetles that secrete cantharidine, a substance that is poisonous in large doses. So, she says, are you familiar with Cantarella? And then Utena's eating like the little biscotti cookies and saying, no, what's that? And she's like, well, it's something that was used by the bourgeois family in Italy long ago. It's a poison. And then she keeps eating the cracker and she's like, well, do you like those cookies? And she keeps eating. She's like, I made them myself. And then they sit there and the record scratching was so creepy. But I did take this to mean something that was a little less creepy. The record scratching was creepy a little bit. And then she's like, oh, well, what a coincidence. I put poison in your tea. And then they both stare and there's that red rose. So there's a lot of ways you could look at this scene here and a lot of ways you can interpret it. So one thing was, if you noticed with the plate of cookies, we don't see Anthe eat any of the cookies. She made the cookies that were poison, but the tea, Utena served the tea to Anthe and herself from the same pot, and they both drank out of it. So if Utena, you know, you could view it as like a Romeo and Juliet situation of, oh, if you die, I'll die along with you. Because you could view it as, there was a part of me that wanted to view it like a Romeo and Juliet moment of, oh, well, if anything happens to you, I'm going to poison myself and we'll both die and be together afterwards. Ha ha ha. There was a part of me that thought that. Then, because we see the red rose spinning off in the corner, which to me represented Akio, even though the white rose represents the prince, I thought that maybe Akio's whole thing was he was trying to poison Anthe and Utena against one another, so they drive each other apart. And then if they drove each other apart, then that would leave him open to snatch up Utena and take her away. So there's that. But there's also kind of like another angle you could take it, where Anthe's like, you know, I'm poisoning you by being here. I'm poisoning you by my presence. And that's a problem. And Utena counters with, well, if you're poisoning me, I'm poisoning you. And so you're no different than I am. And maybe that was to try to console her or give her solace in that moment. Because they both just kind of like look at each other that they've both been poisoned. They're like, you don't say. And then, but here's the thing. even after Anthe said the cookies were poison, and even after Utena said the tea was poison, they both kept eating and drinking. So they both were okay with each other in that moment. And she's like, the tea is delicious. And then she says, so is the cookie. So I feel like in that moment, because even if Akio was trying to pit them against one another, it didn't work. Because they're like, well, if you're poisoning me and I'm poisoning you, we're both doing all right. It's okay in the end. We're both fine with it. And so then they say, Mistress Utena, where will you be in 10 years? And it rotates back to them. And she's like, well, I don't know. But what? And then, so we have the first time around, they're like, where will you be in 10 years? They're like these rotations, like revolutions. They keep going back. The record is skipping. The time is repeating. We're in a time loop. They brought back the damn time loop. I'm like, oh, show, what are we doing? And then we have this version with Akio. She's like, where do you think we'll be in 10 years? And in 10 years, I hope we can still drink tea together like we're doing now. And then when we cut back, see, here's the thing. And the thing about it as well is if you view the red rose as Akio, the first time we saw the red rose, they were revealing that it was poison, like it was going to put them against each other. The second time around, when they're asking where you'll be in 10 years, let's drink tea together, when we pan back to them, they're no longer there. Meaning that Akio has no intention of them being able to drink tea with each other 10 years from now. That doesn't seem to be in his plans. He doesn't want them to be together for that. And she's like, I feel the same way. And then it goes back around again. And they say, yes, that would be nice. And then it slowly pans back towards them. In 10 years, we'll be together, laughing and sipping tea. And the third time around, we go around, and they're like, in 10 years, we're going to be laughing and sipping tea together. They're holding each other's hand in the center of the table. So we have, like, the first time around, they propose something. The second time around, Akio's like, his presence is saying, you guys are not going to be together. That's not going to happen. The third time around is like, no, actually, bitch, we are going to be together, sipping tea, laughing, and Earl has to die. You're not going to be here. Maybe I'm wrong, but that's how I interpret that scene. Because they're holding each other's hands, and they're like, I promise. And they're like, yes, surely we will. And they hold their hands there. And at that moment, I felt too, I'm like, okay, Utena has a plan to be together with Anthe, so she's going to screw over Akio, but she's got to set everything up, and you can't fight Akio until you get on the home turf. So, got to go to the castle first, make it to the final boss level. The thing that's crazy is, after that scene, with them doing that, we see Anthe trying to commit suicide, where she is on top of the building, on top of the tower, like we see it go back to her, and it takes forever to get back to her, but she's on the edge of the tower overlooking the city in her nightgown. Like she's going, and that's when Utena's like, are you running away? And she looks back at her. Now, this scene comes out of nowhere, especially after the tea scene, but again, I feel like at this point, Anthe does not realize that Utena is going to betray Akio. I don't think Anthe believes that because, again, we've established that Anthe has a lot of problems. She doesn't think anything at all of herself, and she believes that there's no... And I'm sure that Anthe has gone along with, oh yeah, in 10 years we'll be sipping tea and be together. But in Anthe's heart, that's not going to happen because Akio has convinced her it's not going to happen. So she thinks, well, I'll just end it now, and then I don't have to go through with the knowledge that Utena is going to be with my brother and possibly suffer through the same stuff that I've suffered through. She's like, I can't live with myself knowing I couldn't keep Utena from having that fate. So, but Utena's like, no. And then she's like, it's no use. She's like, forgive me. And she goes to jump, and I was like, how Utena sprang over there in time and caught her? Girl. But good thing she did. And Utena's like, I'm not going to let you go. And she's like, just let me go. And Utena's like, you're just going to run. And that's when Utena says, don't we have a date to have tea and laugh together in 10 years? At that point, I was like, okay, Utena is definitely 100% back. Like, girl is. And I'm so happy. And she's like, you are not going to kill yourself. We're going to see each other in 10 years. I'm making you a promise. So do not do this. Trust me on this. And she's like, forgive me, Mistress Utena. And again, and when she says, forgive me, again, we have talked this entire series about how Anthe believes she has no power, and everybody around Anthe has told her she has no power and that she's the Rose Bride with no will of her own. She just tried to jump off a building through the will of her own. And even when Utena was like, don't do it, she's like, I have to, let me go. That's her free will. She doesn't think she has it, but she just exercised it in that moment. So yeah. And then Utena's like, well, you know what? This was the last straw. She's like, and that's when they're like, I didn't think you would go. And then, of course, we see Toga and Saionji. The last-ditch effort of the gays to figure it out. Like, girl, what are you going to do? Do you really want to see your prince so badly? And Toga is questioning whether everybody's questioning whether Utena, I mean, not Juri and Mickey, they know now. Nanami knows now too, but Toga and Saionji have been off taking photos with Akio. They don't know. So they're like, are you going up to see Akio? Do you really want to see him that badly? Or your fantasy prince? Do you really want to see him that badly? And she's like, no, it's not just that. And then Saionji's like, well, then why? And that's when Toga opens his eyes like, is she bisexual? He's like, wait a minute. If she's not just going to see her fantasy prince and she's not just going to see Akio, he's like, is it for Himamiya? I love the three of them standing there like they're in, you know what they look like? They kind of look like Sonic Underground colors in that moment, which is fun. Or Knuckles and Julie Sue and, the chameleon, you know, or Vector, the crocodile, whatever you want to do. And she says, whoever believes, and he says, I love that Toga says, you know, are you doing this for Himamiya? Whoever believes in true friendship is a fool. And the Shadow Girls talked about true friendship, remember? And Utena's like, well, lucky for me, I am a fool. I'm a himbo, y'all. So, didn't you know? I am a fool. To me, I was like, yes, bitch. That is exactly what we're doing. And then they're like, the time has come. When you pass through the Rose Gate, the path to the castle will open. And you'll gain the power to bring the world revolution. I feel like Saionji and Toga are like, is she going to make the right choice? I think she is. And there we will meet once more. Signed, your prince. Oh, so the letter did say signed, your prince. And the end of the world signed it. So their letters all said from the end of the world, but hers said from your prince. The act of the letter ripping up everything. I'm like, no, girl. Now, do I think Utena's going to get up to the castle and immediately betray Akio? Probably not. She's going to have to figure out what to do. Do I feel like she's immediately going to win? No, hell no. Akio is terrifying. So, but I think shit's about to go down. And it's about damn time. So then she sees Anthe on the stairs. And Anthe is like, and she has the letter in her hand. And it's all, she's like, there's still time. You can still turn back. And Utena's like, no. She's like, I'm doing this to save you. That's all right. Nope. And she has the ring on. She's like, no, I'm putting the ring back on. But it's not for the reasons you think. She's like, let's go. And Anthe's like, okay. And you can't read Anthe's expressions, which is why it's so hard. You can't read how Anthe feels because she just sits there and smiles. And then she lets the letter go that she taped back together. And it goes straight towards the castle. I've talked for an hour and a half about this. I've talked for a damn hour and a half about this. Oh my God. I am so sorry to all of you for leading you astray. I'm so sorry for being a dense boo-boo head the last 3 episodes, because I'm going to be honest, episode 33 made me really mad for reasons, and I could not, it took me episodes 34 and 35 to clear my head, and then episode 36, I was backlogged trying to catch back up, but now I feel like we're back. We're back. And I was like, oh, thank God, Utena. And I should have had more faith in her. I really should have. But, son of a bitch. Okay. All right. Do I think next week's going to be easy? Hell no. But I think Utena has a plan. I'm going to trust Utena and I'm going to trust the show. But, oh my God. Okay. All right. Well, I'm sure you all have many comments about my comments down below. I hope you all have a wonderful week. Please stay safe, take care, and we have 2 episodes left, y'all. Next week is the penultimate episode of Revolutionary Girl Utena. And I'll see you all there. Bye.